All right, guys, welcome back to the Crossroads of the podcast. My name is Frank.
And my name is Ariel.
So for this week's episode, we are going to be talking about Mahmoud Khalil. And as always, we have an agenda already set out. Ariel's going to go ahead and kind of go over it.
Yeah. So for this week, like Frank said, we're talking about Mahmoud Khalil, and we're going to have a bit of a different format for this one. So because there's so much information out there, we went ahead and agreed to do sort of a background information to kick off this podcast. And so that's going to sort of give an agreed upon list of facts that Frank and I agree on, or we will also like list our disagreement with it as well. And so that'll sort of cover the first section. After the first section, then we'll go ahead and get into our two subtopics, each of which having a conversation, like an argument on both sides, and then a conversation afterwards. First subtopic being, do we think his actions constitute a terrorist threat? And then for subtopic 2, what is the intentions of Trump's administration by going after Mr. Khalil? What are the implications should it stand? And then for the subtopic 3, that's going to be, as we've been doing it, a bit of an more casual conversation. So for that one, what we're going to go ahead and talk about is what would be some things either party could do to increase their popularity. As always, hope you guys enjoy this episode.
And then, as always, we do have a discretion notice, so it's as follows. So the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not reflect the views, policies, or positions of any organization, company, or employer we may be affiliated with. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional or legal advice. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, guys, so some background information on Mahmoud Khalil. So who is Mahmoud Khalil? He is a Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate, specifically obtaining a master's degree at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Mahmoud Khalil was a prominent member of Columbia United Apartheid Divest, CUAD for short, which is a student organization at Columbia University advocating for divestment from companies associated with Israeli policies towards Palestinians. More specifically, it is a coalition of student organizations at Columbia University that advocates for the university to divest from companies and institutions that, in their view, profit from Israeli policies they consider to be apartheid, occupation, and genocide against Palestinians. Furthermore, according to the New York Post, he worked as a political affairs officer with the UNRWA from June through November 2023. The UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. It is a UN agency established in 1949 to provide humanitarian assistance and protection to Palestinian refugees. So, what is he accused for? So, one being he intentionally left out information on his green card application. Secondly, reports indicate that while he was detained by immigration officials due to the Secretary of State determining that Mahmoud Khalil himself and or his activities would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences. As of March 24th, the Department of Justice also alleges that Khalil did not reveal he was working at the Syria office in the British Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, when he applied for his visa, or that he was a member of Columbia University Apartheid Divest, or also referred to as CUAD.
And then sort of to piggyback on the background information, he was a pro-Palestine protester ever since October 7th, 2023, after the attacks happened. And so he was a spokesperson for the protests and for QAD when it came time to do media interviews. He also served as negotiator for QAD in some high-profile occupations in April of 2024 and March of 2025. Sort of what's unique about this case, about his case, is that historically you need to have criminal charges against legal permanent resident to go ahead and deport them, but he has no criminal charges against him. And just to add a few other things, the code of law that he's said to have violated, I'll just go ahead and read it here, is an alien whose presence or activities in the United States, the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable. So that's the statute of law that is being used against him for deportation. Some other things that we're probably going to go ahead and get into are some of the stuff that QAD was involved with and some of the stuff that they did, but we can go ahead and leave that more for the later part, because I think we're going to go ahead and talk about that already. So yeah, I think I have nothing else to add.
Okay, great. With that, we're going to go ahead and proceed and move forward. Okay, guys. So for our first subtopic, the subtopic is, do we think his actions constitute a terrorist threat? So I wanted to go ahead and give some further refinement for free speech. I kind of did more of a dive towards kind of background information related to Mahmoud Khalil's kind of the organizations that he's being, I guess, suspected of being part of. So that was kind of my take of what I wanted to look at. Furthermore, related to the free speech, I kind of wanted to go over past Supreme Court decisions just to kind of help provide further information, not only for like the listeners, but also for myself. I just kind of wanted to know where we're at as far as free speech goes. So our First Amendment. So Congress shall make no law respecting and establish a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So over time, free speech has been modified through Supreme Court cases. For example, Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969. It's the imminent lawless action test. So pretty much a Ku Klux Klan leader made a speech that included racist and inflammatory remarks. The court ruled that speech cannot be punished unless it incites imminent lawless action. This case set the standard that mere advocacy of violence or illegal action is protected unless it directly leads to imminent harm. So a key takeaway from this is, so the government can restrict speech only if it calls for immediate illegal action. So an example is, let's burn that building down right now. But vague or hypothetical statements such as, we should fight back someday, remain protected. Another case is a Snyder versus Phelps in 2011. It says hate speech protection. So this is related to the Westboro Baptist Church. It's when they picketed a soldier's funeral with offensive signs. The court ruled that speech on public matters, even if deeply offensive, is protected. This case confirmed that the First Amendment protects offensive and hateful speech, provided it does not directly incite harm. Another case I want to bring up is Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire in 1942, the fighting words doctrine. So a Jehovah's Witness verbally attacked a police officer. He called the city marshal a damned fascist and other insults in public. The court ruled that fighting words, those that provoke immediate violence, are not protected speech. This case established that direct personal insults or speech meant to provoke an immediate fight can be restricted. So a key takeaway from this is, if you walk up to someone on the street and hurl direct personal insults designed to provoke a physical fight, the government can restrict that speech. So that's kind of the background I wanted to give related to just some past Supreme Court decisions. Now I'm going to go ahead and transition over to some of the, organizations that Mr. Khalil is, being accused of being a part of. So for the first one being, it's for the UNRWA, so the Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. So in early 2024, several countries paused funding for UNRWA after Israel accused some of a staff being involved in the October 7th Hamas attacks. The Israeli government claimed that at least 12 UNRWA employees participated in the attacks, and they provided intelligence reports to back these allegations. Over a dozen countries suspended or reviewed their funding. Overall, the UNRWA fired the accused employees immediately after Israel provided its intelligence. So this is from Philippe Lazzarini, who is the UNRWA Commissioner General. And, quote, for the remaining 9 cases, the evidence, if authenticated and corroborated, could indicate that the UNRWA staff members may have been involved in the attacks of 7th October. I have decided that in the case of these remaining 9 staff members, they cannot work for UNRWA. All contracts of these staff members will be terminated in the interest of the agency. And then during this time for Mr. Khalil, he was, there is a little bit of contention over what exactly he did. There's an article in which I basically stated it was I read an article that pretty much was saying that in his LinkedIn, he had it that he was like a political affairs officer. However, at the same time, I also read from the UNRWA that the political officer position never existed. So it's kind of conflicting in that regard. But ultimately, that I guess he did in some capacity be part of this organization. Now here, secondly, for QAD, so this is going to be from a New York Times article that I found, and then I will apologize. I will probably go bounce between different sources, so please bear with me. So this is a New York Times article, and it's titled "Pro-Palestinian Group at Columbia Now Backs Armed Resistance by Hamas." So this article is dated October 9th. The group has praised a Tel Aviv attack by Palestinian militants that killed 7 people at a light rail station on October 1st. It also commented on Iran's missile attack on the Jewish state that began that evening. In a series of posts on Substack, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, or QAD, narrated its own evolution since last semester from an organization that originally saw itself in April as a continuation of the Vietnam anti-war movement, now focusing more towards Colombia to divest from Israel, to now that openly backs armed resistance by Hamas and other groups. QAD, citing revolutionary thinkers like Vladimir Lenin and Franz Fanon, they explain how solidarity was essential with members of the so-called Axis of Resistance, which includes Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, because they oppose imperialism. Furthermore, I also wanted to bring up an event that happened a couple years back related to one of the members in QAD, one that I guess I kind of did have an issue with. So pretty much this stems from one of the members basically stated the following. This is in a disciplinary hearing that Mr. I believe Kimani James said Zionists don't deserve to live, and be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. In another post, he's also quoted to saying, I don't fight to injure or for there to be a winner or loser. I fight to kill. Obviously, those are very strong remarks. So initially, Kuwait did pretty much, they came out with a kind of like of a post, pretty much apologizing that they don't agree with this, that they don't necessarily align with Kimani James. I guess the thing that I had an issue with, they further rescinded this apology in May last spring about the behavior of Kimani James. So in the post, Kuwait stated, "We let you down," the group wrote in a statement referring to Mr. James. No longer, the group vowed, would it pander to liberal media to make the movement for liberation palatable. Furthermore, so this is going to be, it's from combatantisemitism.org. Within it, it also sources the Associated Press. So the Associated Press described when it wrote on March 10th that although the group, and this is talking about Kuwait, although the group purports to be an anti-war movement, it has also voiced support for leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah, another Islamist organization designated by the U.S. as a terrorist group. Furthermore, Kuwait is now one of the multiple student groups in the city that have used violent language in their protest of the Israel-Hamas war. In August, weeks ahead of the beginning of the school year, Kuwait hailed the October 7th attack and posted, "We are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization." That's sort of the background that I was able to find, because I did not know what this organization, this student organization, which I guess is a combination of multiple student organizations, was a part of, or what exactly they stood for. Secondly, I also wanted to find out more about this the UNRWA that Mr. Khalil is accused of, I guess, being a part of, and not sure in what capacity. So how that relates to the question of, do we think his actions constitute a terrorist threat? Currently, I'm a little conflicted related to sort of linking the charges over to Mr. Khalil. I guess the thing that I do have an issue with is if there's been repeated events or history of these sort of groups having sort of negative history, why would you, knowing your situation as far as being a green card holder, knowing that you may be potentially deported, want to, I guess, be part of such groups? I guess more specifically with Kuwait, that's kind of my take on it. Especially if they've had instances in which they seem to have had sort of headbutting, especially with Columbia University. I guess sometimes it's hard for me to understand why you would want to be part of such a group or organization, considering its history. That's sort of my take. Whether or not he deserves to be deported, I'm not fully sure. Mine's more of it's just the groups that he's part of, especially the Kuwait. Why would you want to be a part of that? I understand he has a right to protest. I just have difficulty understanding why you would want to choose to stay with an organization that has had instances of such actions that I deem to be negative overall. But with that, I will go ahead and move over to Ariel.
So for this subtopic, do we think his actions constitute a terrorist threat? There was a lot of information online that I was finding about this, but it was kind of hard to sort of find a timeline about all the protests that were happening. So it was kind of hard to see what happened when, and sort of how all this sort of came together. So I went ahead and looked at a couple of sort of important dates, specifically with Mahmoud Khalil, and sort of specifically I was looking at the April 2024 protests that were happening. I guess there was encampments that were going on, and he was one of the negotiators during that time. In 2024, just in general, he was also a spokesperson, like I had already mentioned, for protests and on behalf of QAD, talking to different media outlets. Another one that was actually more recent was on March 2025. On March 5th, I believe, there was an occupation of a library. So between these two events, of the encampment protests in April of last year and the occupation of a library, all of this happening in Columbia University, by the way. So I'd like to list like a few of the things that I thought were a bit alarming of QAD. So like Frank went ahead and said, it's a coalition of student organizations. So it's not just one student organization, but a bunch of them. So some of the things that were kind of alarming was that they were passing out pamphlets from the Hamas media office. Then, and Frankie went ahead and mentioned this earlier, in a now deleted Instagram post saying that they are militants, they being the organizations who are fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. One thing I did want to say was he was attending, because he was a negotiator, he wasn't attending these protests for the occupation of the library, but he was around a lot of other protests throughout the year. But based on one of the things that I'm sort of thinking in this situation is the individual versus the organization. I think there's a separation between the two. And so asking if I think his actions constitute a terrorist threat, I don't see enough evidence to say that he's supporting terrorism or that he's a terrorist threat. He wasn't the one passing out the pro-Hamas pamphlets. There's a lot of news coverages he's had during 2024, and he didn't call for violence or said things that show to me that he supports Hamas. There's a lot online that shows very alarming stances that QAD has taken. The organization itself has seen a transition from one that is pro-Palestine to one that supports Hamas by giving out their pamphlets. He was a spokesperson for them when it came to media reviews and was the lead negotiator between the group and Columbia administration. So I believe he has some authority within the group because of the positions he has. If there's evidence that he organized to give those pamphlets or was making posters that said "Death to America" or was calling for violence towards the U.S. or its citizens, I can see him being marked as a terrorist threat. I don't think his relationship with QAD, though, is sufficient to constitute him as a terrorist threat, and for that, I think I need more evidence to say that he supported or supports Hamas. And I think with that, that's where I'll go ahead and end.
Okay, guys, so we just finished up. So do you have anything that's coming to mind that you would maybe want to talk about?
So I think there's some agreement there that QAD has said some and written some very controversial and hateful things. There's been some protests where some of the members or some of the protesters, when they were like occupying the library, there were posters that were saying "Death to America." I think you went ahead and mentioned that there was bearing of an American flag in one of these, which is with, I guess, the bearing of the American flag is legal. Death to America, that's a bit intense. Like that is bordering on violence. Going back to what you were talking about in terms of freedom of speech, I don't know where that lands. So I don't, like, if he was the one, like if he had like
waving a blue flag or something, or
if you caught him like spray painting a sign that said like "Death to America," that'd be questionable, and that'd be more in line with like, okay, that guy is more of a terrorist threat.
So when you mention right now, so do you think if someone's burning the flag and then someone says death to America, would you say they're on the same level of like severity, or you think one's worse than the other?
Oh, I don't know.
Like if someone says death to America and then you have someone burning the American flag, do you think? Because at least when you mentioned it sounded like you were saying that death to America is like worse than burning the flag.
No, it's not that I think it's... Well, maybe I think it's worse, but I'm saying that one is calling for violence.
Okay.
And maybe that's why I think it might be worse, where death to America is more worse. Some of the things that I also read online was sort of like... There's pro-Palestine, but then there's also anti-Israel, which was... And then there's also anti-Semitic stuff where I guess Jews were feeling uncomfortable because there were comments being made towards them that called for violence against them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not cool. That's like if they're protesting and they're trying to get a reaction and also incite violence, that's not necessarily protected by free speech, and so that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Enough to constitute a terrorist threat. That's kind of where it's kind of difficult to question. But so if he were in interviews calling for people to go ahead and go after Israelis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could completely understand telling people to go ahead and him saying like, you go out there and start attacking Israeli individuals is like, okay, then that's a terrorist threat. I'm like, you can't be doing that. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that, I think, would be constituting to be a terrorist, evidence of a terrorist.
Towards basically strengthening the case towards deportation, right?
Yeah,
you were thinking towards
based on a terrorist threat.
Yeah, and I know we kind of mentioned it a little bit. We talked a little bit also about like, you know, what like for in your mind, like what would that look like? What sort of like piece of evidence or pieces of evidence do you think would be necessary so that in your mind is enough for Mr. Khalil's deportation, you know? And I know for one of them we talked about the instance of let's say for this Hamas propaganda, right, that you hear floating around. What if you know, in fact, you know, it happens to be true that whether it be on video or just multiple witnesses, but basically there is evidence that he was spreading Hamas propaganda, in which Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. You know, what in this scenario, you know, do you think that would constitute enough for him to be seen as a terrorist threat?
I would be a little less inclined to say that. I think just because it's propaganda doesn't mean that it's violent. It's just ideas at the end of the day, right? You're talking ideas, and yes, it is coming from a terrorist organization, but just inherently, just because it is doesn't mean that it's violent or it's calling for hate. Now,
okay, so with that in mind, would you say it's a terror? Would you say that's a potential national security concern if it's a propaganda of a known terrorist organization? Do you think now that kind of falls into this national security bubble?
Maybe I can see that more in that sense. So, like, I can see that more, but I'm not just because it's propaganda means that it's bad, because it's at the end of the day it's just ideas. Like, part of the problem is like we're also talking about speech here and not limiting it more than what's already been defined by the Supreme Court, that what's allowed for. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I was just kind of like sort of trying to, you know, bring it back towards like the green card holders, right? For example, like, yeah, they do have some rights, right? But as far as related to like what could lead to deportation, right? And the ones that we're kind of talking about related to the Secretary of State is it's found to be, for example, potential national security issue, something that's national security related. That's why I was trying to link it. Is like, hey, especially for this case, right? Because he's a green card holder, right? Was it permanent citizen?
Yeah, permanent legal resident.
Permanent legal resident. So, but still, he's still kind of bound. He still is within. I guess he could still be deported, right? So I was just trying to kind of like
tie it into that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the it does tie it into it. And it also ties into the second subtopic. But one of the things about that whole nationality, I have a hard time also sort of just reading online. It's a very vague section of law. It doesn't really, it's vague enough to where an accused person doesn't know how to act in accordance with it. So what is violating that? And how does someone defend themselves from violating what he might think? Like, I think it's a bit of too broad to go ahead and say like, oh, it leaves up way too much to the Secretary of State to be like, oh, you're a national security threat. So it's I would like to see some requirements, but I think we'll go ahead and also get into that in the second subtopic. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this one?
No, I don't think so.
I think this one is like one of the more touchy topics that we've went ahead and talked to, because there's a lot of information out there. This one was a tough one to research.
Oh yeah, and then
a lot of information, contradicting information.
yeah. It's like, yeah, you just have all of a sudden, you go, you find something in the Associated Press, but then you have the New York Post come with something a little bit different, and then all of a sudden you get the Times of Israel, like that comes out too. I'm like, what? How is this not potentially biased? You know what I'm saying? So, or the Jerusalem Post.
Yeah.
It's just like, wait a minute. They're saying it's this, but wait a minute. Then you have like the Associated Press or the Wall Street Journal and so forth. So it's kind of like trying to figure out, what exactly is right. And that kind of leads into further research, and that just takes so much more additional time, and it's kind of like tiring sometimes.
Yeah. So you can tell on their bias pretty soon. Like once they start saying that the protests were protests or riots, you could also go ahead and base it on if they were pro-Palestine or anti-Israel. Like there's different ways. Like I was catching on. It's like, okay, where's this? What's the bias that these reporters or journalists had when they were writing this piece of theirs?
Yeah, for sure. So, cool. Well, do you have anything else?
No, that's it. We can move on.
Cool. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and moving forward to the next subtopic.
Moving on to the next subtopic, let me go ahead and read the question. What is the intention of Trump's administration by going after Mr. Khalil? What are the implications should it stand? So I have some stuff written here, so I'll just go ahead and read that. One of the themes of Trump's second administration over the course of the last 2 months is to increase and or expand the powers of the executive branch. This is done by going after gray areas in the Constitution. There will be lawsuits, and a judge or judges will have to decide if Trump's actions are constitutional or not. If they aren't, then that's been the status quo for the longest time, and nothing really changes. If he wins these court decisions, the President of the United States has new authority/power vested to him by the Constitution. We see this, we can see these actions of trying to increase his powers by him deporting 200 Venezuelans from a country we are quote-unquote at war with. In this situation, the specific code of law in Section 237 of the INA, which is the Immigration Nationality Act, also falls in this gray area of the law. The usage of this law has been, in the past, stricken down as unconstitutional due to it being too vague. Basically, the way it's written, the accused has no way of knowing how to conform with this law. With that said, this decision was later nullified for another reason, being that it shouldn't have reached that court first, but the immigration courts first. If Mahmoud Khalil is deported for this reason, the Section 237, where he's deemed a threat by specifically Secretary of State Marco Rubio, there would be newfound powers that the executive branch would have, specifically the Secretary of State. Because of the vagueness of the statute, there's potential for him to deport non-citizens that may exercise freedom of speech that he disagrees with. We are already seeing this in the case with, and I apologize for if I mispronounce this, Rumeza Osturk. She is currently on a student visa going for her PhD at Tufts University. On March 26th of 2024, she and a few others, so last year, she and a few others co-authored an opinion piece that was critical of the university's response to request resolutions from a student body. Those requests being to, and I'm just going to read from the piece that they wrote, the request being: acknowledge the Palestinian genocide, apologize for the university President Sunil Kumar's statements, disclose its investments, and divest from companies with direct or indirect ties to Israel. That's all the four students did. They expressed their opinions. She was detained by ICE on March 25th of this year. When Marco Rubio was asked about her detention, he said, "We gave you a visa to study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses." By threatening deportation of non-citizens for pro-Palestinian speech, this administration is limiting what constitutes free speech for this group of people. And with that, I yield my time.
Okay, guys. So for the secondary subtopic, just to reiterate, so what is the intentions of Trump's administration by going after Mr. Khalil? What are the implications should it stand? So with this subtopic, I am kind of going to just speak off my mind. I did some research, but not as much as I would have liked. So I will address the first part of this question. So related to the intentions of the Trump's administration. So in my mind, I believe a big part, as far as the intentions aspect, has to be kind of this sort of overarching, tougher stance on immigration. I believe this also may be related to, besides being tougher on immigration, part of it I think is also kind of, they may be also targeting non-citizens, and I guess that falls under this whole scope of tougher on immigration. Also, part of me also thinks potentially it has to do with this whole kind of like this I believe they call it psychological like subversion. I think part of it maybe is that they may be trying to address that. Not just saying that I agree with the ways, but maybe potentially some of it is related to that. And the whole psychological subversion is pretty much, for example, having foreign nations who don't necessarily align with us. They pretty much are. The main intention is to sow disarray, sort of discontent in the country, to kind of make, I guess, the general citizenry against each other, to kind of cause issues in that sense socially. So I feel like potentially this might be sort of a way that they're trying to combat that. Like I said, not saying that I agree with that. Just kind of just sort of a working theory as far as Trump's administration's intentions. Now, for the implications, should it stand? I'm not sure. I think I told Ariel already that for the secondary part of this question, I'm not fully sure. So with that, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so moving on to the conversation piece for this subtopic. Sort of one of the things that I take away from this is it seems to me that they're limiting freedom of speech for these groups of individuals that because of how vague the statute is written, it allows for the Secretary of State to go ahead and have a lot of movement, or like there's not really a requirement list of things that say like this is what constitutes as a terrorist threat and stuff like that. It really leaves it up to him to decide. And so in this case of Mahmoud Khalil, part of the whole thing is that he was associated with a coup, with Kuwait, which has said a lot of stuff that is very controversial and said things like Death to America, where it's very hateful and calls for violence. And because of that association, there's more of a gray area. But in the case of Rumeza Öztürk, she went ahead and wrote in just an opinion piece. Didn't as of what I've seen, and as of right now, she didn't show up, like she wasn't protesting or anything like that. There were Senate resolutions or student body resolutions, and she just went ahead and wrote an opinion piece. And so I was wondering what you thought of that, and because Marco Rubio went after her all the same for just expressing her words on paper. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was wondering what you thought of that person.
So honestly, besides you kind of explaining it, that's kind of the first time I kind of did hear about her arrest, but I did not know like the specifics.
For sure.
Do you know was she also part of any other like student organizations, or was it just purely just that opinion piece? Or
just from what she was part of a student body, mm-hmm. And she was part of 2 student bodies, but those student bodies came together to come up with 4 asks from mm-hmm. the university, and they were, I'm not sure if they were upset with 3 of them, but their asks were like they disclosed investments with Israel and divest from mm-hmm. them, that they go ahead and acknowledge what happened as a genocide to Palestine, mm-hmm. and then for the university president to go ahead and apologize for some of the remarks he made. That is the limit. She went ahead and got doxxed recently, like mm-hmm. right around the whole March thing, when Mahmoud Khalil also mm-hmm. went ahead and got detained. Mm. But yeah, like from all evidence, it's just that opinion piece.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would need to know more of the specifics to really come up with like not necessarily an opinion as to whether or not like it warrants deportation or an arrest, right? So I probably need to know a little bit more. But yeah, I also like the part you were talking about, the vagueness in the Secretary of State's kind of sort of power. Like it's like vague, right? So that for sure needs to be more specific as far as what does that entail, and also if someone is being suspected of sort of being a national security issue, like what does that mean exactly, right? Yeah. Maybe becoming more specific, I think it's something that maybe we should really talk about what it is exactly that now constitutes someone as being a national security threat, and furthermore for non-citizens especially, because obviously it's for this specific scenarios, that's groups of people that are being that right now are on like the headlines, right? So I guess also kind of like refining, also applying it to that in those situations too. But overall, the Secretary of State's I guess overall power in that regard
needs to be limited, is what you're saying, like in the sense of there needs to be a set of requirements that are laid out by law, like this is actionable deportation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Oh no, I would say yeah. I think that's definitely important. Overall, yeah, and I guess how that's going to be determined, I guess I am curious. I would want to know what exactly, because at the same time, it's like I'm sure you have your kind of potential like sort of ideas, or what are some things that constitute now potentially of if now that it's hitting a national sort of security, I guess avenue or bubble, whatever you want to call it. That now is, oh, okay, you know what, that could be seen now as a national security threat. Thus, here there's going to be further consequences, right? One of those maybe potentially being deportation, right? So I'm curious to see how that path goes down, or hope if it does, right? And what's going to be sort of like filtering down. Okay, if you do X, Y, X, Y, and Z, like if you do any of those, now you're going to be marked for potential deportation because you're thus violating.
Yeah. I can see that. I think for these specific cases, it's their association with pro-Palestine, and I think they're trying to limit that conversation and make non-citizens afraid to go ahead and
protest in general,
and express their opinion. Like in this case with the girl, and maybe there's more information, like you said, that I'm not aware of. But just from face value, that was the extent to her activism, and she's getting deported to that. And I think they're trying to silence non-citizens by fear of, you go ahead and do this, you go ahead and say anything that's sort of against the United States government or our allies, because Israel's our ally, that's deportable. One of the things that is a little different is that Mahmoud Khalil was on a student visa, is now on a permanent legal resident status. She is still on a student visa. So there are different rules that might apply.
Okay.
But regardless, they're still using this moniker of she was being a social activist. And thing is, like, they are still allowed freedom of speech. Excuse me. They are still allowed freedom of speech. Non-citizens are. That's one of the. There is some dispute on some of the other rights that they have less of, but freedom of speech is not one of them. So this is, to me, the intent is shown by the other things that they've also done, not just with Mahmoud Khalil, but with this girl as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you have anything else that you wanted to, I guess, sort of chime in under, or?
No, I think that's it for right now. So,
okay. Cool.
Moving on to the next one.
All right. All right, so for our last piece here, topic being, what would be some things either party could do to increase their popularity? So for me, I searched around sort of different topics, trying to see what would be something that can be agreed, or at least have a good chance of it being bipartisan overall. So for one of them, I chose expanding the child tax credit. So this has been generally popular across parties, especially if tied to work requirements. So for this piece, so the idea of tying the child tax credit to work requirements means that families would only qualify for the full benefit if at least one parent is employed and earning income. So this has gotten, in the past also, gotten Republican support. So many conservatives believe welfare programs should encourage work rather than create dependency. By requiring employment, the credit incentivizes people to stay in the workforce. And then on the Democratic support is many Democrats favor expanding the C2C, or the child tax credit, to help reduce child poverty, but some are open to work requirements if it means getting bipartisan backing for an expansion. So as an example, so like families could receive the full credit only if they meet a minimum income threshold. So an example given, $2,500. So that's in past versions. Those earning below that threshold might receive a reduced amount or no credit at all. Exceptions might apply for disabilities, caregiving responsibilities, or parents and job training programs. So in the past, so this has already got a bipartisan report in the past, in slightly different versions. So for example, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Job Acts version. So this increased the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000 per child. So there was a work requirement. So parents had to earn at least $2,500 per year to qualify. The credit was partially refundable up to $1,400 per child, meaning lower income families could still benefit, but only if they had some earned income. Currently, the 2024 bipartisan child tax credit proposal. This is bipartisan. It's sponsored by Republican Representative Jason Smith of Missouri and then Democrat Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. So its compromises often involve Republicans agreeing to higher credits and then Democrats agreeing to work incentives. So I found that to be an interesting one. It seems to be both agree on a child tax credit. It seems to be conservatives they want to have some sort of like threshold as far as income is concerned, and then for the Democrat side, they want to have higher credits versus the other one wants to have more of a threshold of like you need to be working and meet certain income requirements, and the other one is they're in agreement. They just want to give them more money, I guess. It's kind of from what I was able to find. I feel like that would be kind of a thing that would be popular because I mean it's like just a child tax credit. I think most people want to support families, especially with kids. So
do you think that has? Well, I think part of that might also just come from a place of population growth is kind of stagnating in the United States, and let's incentivize couples having kids, right? So that'd be a nice way to incentivize that type of behavior. I can see that having bipartisan support. One of the things because we went ahead and talked about this like a couple weeks back, and we were trying to remember exactly what we went ahead and discussed, but I did remember one of them for sure, and that was the limiting the types of stocks that representatives in both branches of the legislative branch from holding specific types of stocks. So when I say specific types of stocks, I'm talking about like individual stocks. So sort of not allowing House representatives or senators to go ahead and hold stock in individuals. Like I think mutual funds makes a lot of sense. Like that's okay. Like it makes sense to want to see the entire the growth of an entire industry work out. So like mutual funds make sense. But what you also see is a lot of representatives making bank off of like insider trading or knowing where the wind is going to blow, what laws are likely to get passed or are currently being worked on. And so it kind of creates this conflict of interest with the with these representatives to there's this interest for them to also there's an incentive for them to pass certain legislation or not pass certain legislation based on the money that can be made. So I think there's a lot of support for that. Yeah, it's I
believe Raytheon is a publicly traded company. It's like a New York Stock Exchange, right? I believe. Yeah, it's kind of like if you're in if you're a representative and you're friends with someone who's in Armed Forces Committee who's responsible for deciding which contracts and maybe through conversations you might know that, or they're leaning towards a particular company. To say it's a certain government contract, and there's 10 companies that are competing for it. But based on the conversations you have with someone in the Armed Forces Committee, it seems like they're leaning, let's say, this example to Raytheon, and it's like, and that you're getting a good sort of like ahead of time. I mean, that gives ample amount of time for you to load up on that stock.
Yep.
So yeah, I think
that's information that other people don't know. Yeah,
exactly. And I feel like, but I don't know the specifics, but I feel like for insider trading, that's one of the, although it being illegal, I think it's one of those that it rarely do people get
caught for it.
Yeah, or I guess investigated, because it's kind of it's a very difficult one to try to find someone guilty of. Like it's very time consuming. Yeah, so it's kind of like it is illegal, but really going after someone is very like time consuming, and it's not necessarily on someone's. I don't know if it's the right saying, but kind of like a white collar sort of crime.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like and I know it's not as sexy as like going after like, oh yeah, there's a manhunt for the serial killer, or like there's a child rapist, it's like it's not as sexy, so it's kind of like in the same in that same sort of tone, like there's more of a potential likelihood to maybe get away with it. I don't know, like
but definitely there shouldn't be this conflict of interest. Like, not letting these representatives make so much money, because they're supposed to be representing the people, not really focusing on like gaining money from these laws that they pass. Another one I thought has bipartisan support. I think that it kind of shifted over the last 10 years, whereas beforehand it was just Democrats. But I think there's this shift where a lot of Republicans now too, just federally legalizing weed. I don't think like it makes sense to be locking people up for using weed. I think that that's one of those like low hanging fruits. Like if some administration were to go ahead and go out and legalize it, there would be applause from both sides of the aisle, that regardless of your politics, like I think everyone can come to agreement. There's going to be a select few who definitely disagree with it, but I think that that's a small minority at this point.
No, yeah, I agree. It's kind of like over time you've seen sort of like slowly begin to see states begin to legalize marijuana in various capacities. Like I remember I think was it Colorado being the first state that legalized cannabis?
Might have been. I'm not too sure. I was thinking Seattle too, like Washington, but it might be Colorado too.
Yeah, it might have a flip flop. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
But I mean, man, you've seen ever since the first state sort of legalized in some capacity, you've just seen so many states begin to add to the pile. I think now it's over 30 states have some form of legalization.
Yeah. So California was the first one to legalize medicinal weed, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about recreational.
Yeah.
So which state legalized?
I think it might be Colorado, because I know I remember they made a big thing about how much money they were getting. Because I think they were.
Oh, this is interesting.
What'd you find?
Wasn't the first state Colorado wasn't, but it was one of the first two, along with Washington. So I guess there was a tie for first, like those two states. The dawn of recreational legalization. On November 6, 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first two states to legalize recreational cannabis use when voters approved Colorado Amendment 64 and Washington Initiative 502 respectively. So I guess it was a tie for first. And that's why we both, like, there's that, like, which one came first?
Yeah. You know what's funny is, so, like, I have family in Colorado, and I remember speaking to one of my family members when all this is going on. They told me when they had one of the first pop-up stores that was right there, like at least where in the city that they resided in, that it was like a huge, that the line was like, it just went around the block. Like there were so many people that it was just kind of nuts. Like there were just so many people just waiting for this. I thought that to be interesting. But I remember also hearing about like they got millions of dollars worth because they were taxing it, right? That's part of it. I don't remember the figures, but I know it's millions of dollars. It's like now it's additional sort of like
income coming in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was kind of cool too. It's kind of like yeah, we're gonna go ahead and allow this, I guess this drug, right, to be used recreationally. It's gonna be taxed a little bit more, but you're gonna be allowed to use it now.
More
right?
money for the state.
So it's like now they can use that. So yeah, I think overall, I think we've gotten. I think now to the point in which I think it's maybe, would you say it's the majority now would be okay with the sale of cannabis?
Yeah, for recreational use, yeah, I think so. Because I think a lot of people are kind of in agreement of you're allowed to do to yourself what you want to a certain extent, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing super hard or anything like that. But weed is one of those things where it's like if we legalize alcohol, weed is sort of on par with that type of drug too.
Yeah, and that sort of stigma is kind of like fading away too.
Yeah.
Especially now with like more research is coming out too. Like especially like CBD, like just or even extracting like the oil from the actual like the main drug that gets you high and seeing some of the medicinal properties that comes along with it. I think it's gonna help sort of like break sort of those like negative connotations. Especially when. Versus when it was early on, like the war on drugs sort of deal, So I feel like that's fading away. So, but I agree. I think that's something that whoever does it, whoever wants to do it, that might be some immediate positive points to their party. Whoever wants to, hint, I don't know,
It's going to be a long time because there's a whole business behind it of getting these legal. If you legalize it, you can't make it a crime, and there's a lot of criminal offenders for the weed. But I guess that might also be like a state thing. Like how many are federally getting caught for this? Like how often does that happen? That I don't know. What do you think of sort of not allowing for corporations to donate to politicians directly? Where it has to be individuals donating to politicians, not corporations.
I don't know too much for related to specifics, but
because it's always like saying like you got to get the money out of politics.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't want to say I think that's kind of like because I know there's limitations for how much like an individual can donate, right?
Yeah.
And we have set that up, and that kind of sounds just kind of it's a way to get around like a loophole sort of deal. Yeah, I don't know. I feel maybe that could be something that's a popular one that would help out either party, because it's just kind of like like you mentioned, you're removing money from politics. So hopefully with that, it's gonna be more about the actual ideas versus some potential hidden agenda or alternative motives as to why, certain companies are pushing more money towards either be a party or a specific candidate, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And it's just, I guess from a corporation standpoint, it's just so much money coming from not an individual, but just a corporation. And like that corporation has like what's best for its corporation, and so they're just allowed to like give so much money, and that's problematic. I think, like you said, like both sides go ahead and see money in politics as a problem, so like limiting it is like would be a good thing.
Yeah, we need to go back to I feel like just core basics of based on the core whatever argument it is, just solely focusing on that and not some like don't have money tied into it, because I feel like that's one of probably many ways someone can be corrupted, right? Through money, power, influence, whatever it might be, right? So removing, I guess, that potential, the potential of, I guess, would be a great step, and I feel like most people would get behind.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else, man?
No, I think that sums it up for this week. Yeah.
So,
we'll have another one. when was the last time we posted? Like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, so we are, I guess, like a week behind.
Yeah, we're something like that, like a week behind. So you guys should expect another podcast next week, so that way we can go ahead and catch up and get back on schedule. So yeah, next week we'll be coming out with another podcast as well. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and as always, feel free to like our
comment,
videos, comment, subscribe. If you have any potential ideas, or if you have if you had an issue with something that we may have said, that way it needs further clarification on our end. I think we both are pretty open overall. I actually want to make sure we are as informed with facts as much as possible. Yep. So I think we both are very receptive.
Yep.
Cool.
Agreed.
All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the episode, and we'll see y'all at the
next one.
All right.